Back for another edition of The Journey, thanks to BMG Partners. And this time around I sit with Helen Newman from Nomad Films. So a filmmaker, Helen. This is going to be a very interesting chat, I'm sure, for a lot of people, because we will explore how you become a filmmaker and obviously that as a profession. But let's start, as we always do on The Journey. What's your connection to Albury Wodonga? How long have you lived here? Did you grow up here? How have you come to live here now?
Sure, yeah. Well, I was born here, raised here. So, yeah, my connection is my parents built their first home here and, one of 5 kids who grew up in North Albury. Went to St Anne's Primary School, followed by what was St Joseph's High School, and it changed to Xavier High School. So that was the beginnings of my time here, yeah.
Yeah. And so as you were going to school, was the film industry or that sort of artistic side something that shone through? Or what did you want to do? What were you thinking you'd become?
Yeah. Look, I had no idea. I think I was in a family that, you worked hard, the work ethic was really there, and you were a good citizen. And I think in terms of being an artist or a creative, that just wasn't even a word. However, we had a piano, an old piano that had been my nana's. So my mum worked really hard to raise the money for myself and my brother to get piano lessons. So I started piano at age 8 and turned out to be reasonably okay at it. So I kept going with that. And I think that was my creative outlet. And so I'm not sure if there hadn't been a piano, I might have found some other way, but I think I always was a creative. I just didn't know that, and we didn't have that language in our family. So it took me a long time to work out who I was. But I studied piano until I got my associate diploma in music, which I got a couple of years after I finished school. So that was like, studying from age 8 right through until I was 25, I think. Yeah.
And so at what point did the filmmaker thing come across your desk, or the idea or the inspiration, or what was the first thing that you recorded?
Yeah, well, that was a complete accident for which I am eternally grateful. So when I had my 3rd child on my hip, still breastfeeding, it was back in 1999, and the Kosovo refugees had come to Australia, and a large collection of them had been settled here in this area, and they had signed a waiver when they came, which a lot of them didn't understand, that they could only be in Australia in safe haven for 12 months. So the 12 months was up. They were going to be sent back to Kosovo. For some of them, it wasn't safe to go back. So I put on my protester hat, which I'd been flexing a little bit beforehand, weirdly. And I was out there with my best friend. She was pregnant. I had a baby. I was breastfeeding. We'd be out there with our placards going, please don't send them home. I think for me, at that point, I guess I was being politicised in a different way. I was seeing a part of Australia that I wasn't proud of, because I learned about our detention centre regime. So as someone who was making a noise about that, there was a filmmaker who come up from Melbourne, and he started documenting that story, and I was one of the people that he was following the story of. And at some point, a few months down the track, I picked up the camera and I went, wow, this makes sense to me. It fits with my creative side. It fits with my idea of giving voice to social justice. So that was kind of how it began, weirdly. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm guessing, what were you doing up until that point? Obviously a busy mum of 3. What had you been sort of known for to that point in career-wise?
So after I left school, I was accepted to study economics, and that made no sense to me. I don't even know why I applied. Instead, I went and became a piano teacher. So I was a piano teacher for a few years. I got married quite young, and we had a child. Well, I was pregnant with our child. And then my husband died in a car accident while I was pregnant. So that, for me, was a turning point. That, I would say, was what shifted me sideways and gave me a much better connection to a broader view about what it means to be on this planet, I guess. And so from there, I continued piano teaching for a while, which was awesome as a single mum, new baby. And then I decided, stupidly, that I wanted more of a challenge. So I went and studied social welfare. And I worked as a crisis counsellor. I worked as court support for women escaping domestic violence. I worked as a community development worker. And all these things made sense to my slightly shifted worldview, but it was really hard. So I, at some point I was going, this isn't really working for me. Anyway, I got pregnant, had a third baby, was kind of busy, and so I stopped with the community development work I'd been doing.
What an interesting path. And I think the thing that you touched on there briefly, the grief and trauma, I think anybody who's been through something substantial, their perspective on life completely shifts. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. I am not the same person. And I think I knew that day, that I would never be the same person again. I had to work out who I was going to be, because you're given, and at such a young age, I was 21 as well, so at such a young age to be pregnant and widowed it meant you have to rethink how you work your life. And also I think it is the good thing from it is it demands that you think about your purpose. And so, that's what I did with that experience.
Yeah. And so we'll go back onto the filmmaking again.
Yep.
So you've sort of, I guess, been the subject of a filmmaker. You've shown that this could be me. You've gone and started to do it. What have you filmed over your 20-odd years of sort of entering into this realm? What have you sort of grabbed your attention, or what have you wanted to stand for in your filmmaking?
Yeah, I think the core of my work is that I want to give voice to people who don't have voice. Like that, if somebody said to me, "What is it?" That's the one thing I want to do. With that film that I mentioned with the Kosovars, it became a feature documentary that we got fully funded for. So I went from, sort of like mum with 3 kids in Albury, really not knowing much outside that world. I hadn't travelled at all, to working with an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker to make a feature-length documentary. And I ended up in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan and all these places I didn't mean to be. But I think the core of it was I was following people's stories, and I really wanted to honour the trust that they'd put in us and give them voice.
And you mentioned that, we've talked about the grief and trauma can change your mindset. What about that international travel, that exposure to, I guess, a worldly view? Yeah,
definitely changes, again, I guess, how I see my place in the world. It's a very humbling experience as well, and it definitely cuts through any arrogance around, we're the best people in the world, because I've never met hospitality like I've met when I've travelled in dangerous places. I've got to know the nuances of other cultures so much better, and I feel really privileged to have had that experience. Yeah,
that's great. So it's an art form, filmmaking. Mm-hmm. It's something that I know takes a lot of time, and is that once you're hooked into these sorts of arts, you're passionate, you're locked in on it. But what do we find you doing with your spare time? Yeah,
I do work a lot, and the studio is at the back of my house, so I can work a lot. Things I love to do, I think I really enjoy at the moment. I've just sort of gone, right, I want to spend some time in my garden. Mm-hmm. That's been kind of awesome. I have 3 kids, so they're all growing up now, but spending time with them is pretty awesome as well. And I like camping and, walking, so swimming, love the river. I really consider that one of the best things about living in this town is the river, and I live really close to it. So, nothing outstanding, I guess. Yeah.
It's the importance of fresh air, I think.
Yeah, and look, particularly, I guess, with this project I'm working on at the moment, around staying well in yourself, not just physically but emotionally, mentally, that physical exercise, it's just so important, the fresh air. Yeah, we've been lucky.
Let's give that a plug while we're going. Let's talk about what's the project you're on at the moment.
So currently now I'm working on a feature doco called Solstice, the documentary, and the story centres around a local story of Annette and Stuart Baker, who lost their daughter Mary to suicide when she was just 15. Mary had struggled with an eating disorder for 3 years before she took her life. And so about 2.5 years ago, I met with Annette, and they wanted me to film this incredible event that they hold here each year, the Winter Solstice. And then part of the talk was, do you think there's a documentary in this? I said yes, but I really, for a year, didn't really know what the story was I was telling. It's so big, was it youth suicide? Was it eating disorders? Was it Annette and Stuart? Was it what was it? Was it suicide generally? And I kept filming these people that Annette would bring to me. She'd say, you need to talk to this person, you need to talk to that person. And eventually I worked it out and I distilled it down. And the voices that were always coming to the fore were people who had either lost someone to suicide or attempted to take their own life, who were now working to change how we operate in our mental health space. So recognising the gaps in services, recognising how there's still a stigma and a silence around suicide in particular, but also mental health. So that's what the documentary is now about. It's about those voices and how they bravely step through their grief to create the change that they see is needed. And I think the theme for each of those people is they don't want anyone else to go through what they went through.
It's almost back onto that trauma and grief theme again, isn't it? In terms of it takes something substantial and quite often quite horrible and emotional to be able to potentially allow us to grow and I guess have that positive perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's interesting because I guess it's taken me a while to realise that a lot of the work I do is around grief and loss, or people who have lost something. I've done quite a bit of work with refugees as well. And I was talking to the writer Arnold Zabel. He always tells stories of migration. And that's his childhood experience. His parents migrated to Melbourne. They fled the Holocaust. And we were talking about how in some ways what you're doing by telling these other stories is continually reworking your own thing that you need to work out. And so for me, I think it probably is grief and loss.
So how would other people describe you, do you think?
That's so tough. Passionate, I think, is one word they would use. Probably really annoying, actually. I don't like to let things go. Once I've committed to something, I'm pretty dedicated to it. So I guess that's something. I guess it's a really tough one to know how other people see me. Yeah.
A lot of people tend to have somebody that they admire. They watch the work of and go, look, if I could be half of that person one day, I'd be happy.
Yeah.
Who is that for you?
Well, I think I'm really lucky. My work puts me in the worlds of people who I admire. So when I'm telling a story of someone, I admire them. And so I would say right now, I have, through working on Solstice documentary, I have developed such an admiration for people who get up each day, whose world's been turned upside down. They get up each day, they walk through that grief, and they bravely demand better, or they simply just get up, and seeing the challenges of people who struggle with serious mental health issues. I think, so if I can say a collective people I admire, I think it's the people that are facing those challenges and still stepping forward.
You'd probably, through your line of work, as you said, meet interesting people with really compelling stories to be told. You probably start to see some wisdom develop out of these stories and maybe quotes or filters that people put on their lives. What are do you have some great ones that come to mind, or ones that you've thought, I could use that in my situation? Is there any great quotes or advice?
I do have a quote that I use for me. It fits for me, and it's an Anis Nin quote, and it's, life shrinks or expands in accordance to one's courage. And for me, that's been really important because sometimes I'm really, really scared. Like, going to Iraq, I was really scared. I did not want to go. I felt sick. And so I think that quote, life shrinking or expanding according to your courage, is really important to me. Wouldn't fit for everyone, but for me it helps.
Yeah. No, I can see how that's one I haven't heard before, and is quite a good one. Sliding door moments in life. Have you had any of those? Or I'm sure it sounds like you would have.
Yeah, I guess there's been a few. I'm trying to think of some moments. Definitely, there's been lots. In a professional sense, I was in Afghanistan, and it was just after the Taliban had fallen, and we were filming the story of refugees that had been trying to get out of that country. And I'm not sure if it's a sliding door moment. It was a point where you make that decision to walk away rather than challenge it. We'd been filming all day. we just had decided to do a day of visuals. So we were in Kabul, we'd got the fairy lights and this and that, and we'd accidentally filmed a US facility that was behind black stuff. And so suddenly our car was surrounded and there's Kalashnikovs in the window going, you've got to give us your footage. I guess I really wanted to fight for that footage. I'm really glad I didn't fight for that footage. We lost it. I'm not sure if that's a sliding door moment, but I guess it was, a life or death moment, maybe.
It's a moment in time, isn't it? A moment in time where you're, wow.
Yeah.
what a time to be alive. What's the best thing that's ever happened to you?
And this is going to be so obvious, but it really truly is my kids. Yeah, I think, with my work, it touches me in a really deep way and it changes me, but there's nothing quite like your own children. They really make you learn about who you are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. They make you dig deeper into yourself to become that better person as well and teach you so much.
They challenge you, don't they?
Yeah.
More than just the challenging moments. They challenge you to think differently, to be more open with your mind. And you quite often see, some of the toughest people, once they're in the presence of their own children, a completely different person, aren't they?
And I think there's that thing too where if I disagree with someone who's not part of my world, it's easier to not engage with that. When it's my child, I really have to drill down inside myself to find that connection and understanding and see it their way. So they stretch me.
And it probably leads to another good question around hindsight and thinking of a younger you, or maybe advice that you've given your own kids. What advice do you wish you had as a younger person?
I think probably I wish that I'd understood that you can stay true to yourself, to really be still and listen to the voice inside yourself and follow that and trust that it can happen. I think when I look back on my childhood, I say that I lacked imagination, and I think I lacked imagination about what was possible. So I wish, I would not wish, I'm really happy with where I am, but I would like to have had that understanding sooner.
Yeah, the ability to dream big and see where it takes you.
Yeah.
I know this is the first journey for 2021.
Yeah.
And we've all tried to come into the new year and be like, it is a new year. We're resetting again. We're still really global pandemic touch. The aftermath will be felt for a long time yet. Let's talk about you personally, your industry, your family and friends. What was living, and I'm sure even as a filmmaker you've got some thoughts around this, because I know me with my job in media, I'm like, we're living history at the moment. This is a moment in time that people will be interested to hear our views on in decades to come. How's it impacted you the last 12 months?
So personally, I actually feel like I was quite lucky. I did lose all my work for a little while there. Yeah. That was horrid. But again, living on the border, I could always go for a walk in the hills. I could always go and be by the river. So I feel personally I was quite lucky, except that I did lose all my work for a little while, and that was really scary. I think professionally it actually changed the film I was making. So I thought that I had just about finished making Solstice, the story, and then when the fires happened, I went, there's a whole new chapter. The fallout, the mental health fallout from those fires is going to be huge. And then COVID overlaid itself on that. So those communities couldn't pick themselves up. So it's changed my main project that I am passionately working on, and meant that I've had to really rethink how I tell that story. And sadly, the last chapter of the film now does involve the deaths of two young men who took their life following the fires, and as a result of the impact of COVID on their small communities. And I know it's been life-changing. I think it's an interesting thing in that there are very few things that we experience as a global population. And I know we all experience this pandemic differently, but we've all experienced it. And so I think at some level we've all got some understanding of what it is to go through it. And that for me is quite interesting, because when I'm telling stories, I'm trying to connect people who have no understanding to someone else's experience, or very little understanding. I'm hoping in some ways that this pandemic might create those connections and that empathy.
It's that perspective, isn't it? It's quite easy to get caught up in our own country or even our own state issues and sit here and say, we've got a divide between our community with a border closure or something like that.
Yeah.
But if you stand right back from a view that perhaps you would traditionally take of that global sort of situation, you start to go, if that's all we've got to complain about, we're pretty lucky, aren't we?
Yes. Yeah. I feel like we are very lucky. I'm very, very glad I don't live in the US right now.
Yes, definitely. So with these journeys, we look at the local connection. We look at what you do. Why are you so passionate about? We're hearing a little bit in here, but why are you so passionate about people that don't have a voice?
I guess when I was a kid, I don't know. I don't know if you're wired that way. When I was little, I shared a bedroom with two sisters for a little while and then with just one sister, and we'd sort of go, what do you wish for in the world? And it's so corny and kind of a bit tragic that I would always go, I wish for world peace. And it's a bit wanky, really, but I really truly did. So I think I might have even just always had that consciousness at some level. I just never really understood until I was in my mid-20s how to express that or how to find a way to do that. So there's that. And then definitely losing my first husband so suddenly did make me go, I've got to kind of make what I do worthwhile or for me make sense. I'm really lucky that every day when I wake up, what I do makes sense to me.
Yeah, you're very much in that community. It's a community service, what you're doing, really, even though it's a profession. It's helping tell stories. I know you've got the documentary with Solstice, and that's all around mental health and the trials and tribulations and how can we change and what can we do. From all the people you've spoken to, what's the magic bit of advice? Like we're hearing, mindfulness and all these different bits and pieces, empathy, what we can do to try to improve our mental health. What do you see is working?
That's a multi-layered question. I'm sorry, I can't give you but I will give you the multi-layered answer, which I've thought about a lot.
Great.
So to go at a personal level, I think it's really quite simple. It's be kind to one another. So that requires us to allow another person the space to perhaps not be well that day, even though we don't know it, and to listen. Are you okay day's great. It is really, really important that we talk to one another, we ask how one another is, and we also feel that if we're not well, we can say that we're not well as well. That's great. All that layering at that individual and community level, winter solstice, so communities getting together like winter solstice does, taking away that silence and fear that happens around mental illness, challenging all that. That's great at that community level. When you get to a policy level, what we have here is a real gap in funding. So it's great if you can go, you're not feeling well, you need to get some help. Open the door of needing to get some help, and surprise, surprise, you can't get the right help. So that's the big gap I see in terms of that. We really need to change the way we fund and the way we create services around mental health. And putting money into campaigns is the easy answer, but it's not going to deal with deep, serious mental illnesses. That's where you need really good professionals trained up. So, it's a multi-layered issue. And I think overlaying all that is like, if we understood mental ill health the same way we understand cancer and we responded to it in the same way, so you wouldn't turn up at an emergency hospital and go, I've got cancer, and they go, oh, well, look, just come back because it's not bad enough yet. Or we can't fit you in, so, we'll find you a bed in a couple of months' time. You don't do that with cancer. So the day that we can treat someone who has a mental illness the same way we treat someone who has cancer, it's bone cancer, we do this. It's breast cancer, we do that. In fact, it's this kind of breast cancer, we do this. Having that specialised support, that's when we'll have done well.
Is there a country in the world doing it well?
Some do it better than others, definitely. And look, in some countries you end up even here, sadly, a lot of people end up in prison as a result of not getting the right help. In some countries, you end up chained up to a bed somewhere. We're definitely doing better than that. I think every country has a long way to go. And that goes back to that stigma and that fear and also the shame. You know, it was only a short while ago that people who took their life took their own life were not allowed to be buried in a graveyard. They had to be buried outside that sacrosanct ground. So we're unconsciously carrying all these stereotypes and these stigmas that we need to let go of so then we can fully embrace, just like there was a stigma around cancer at one point too. Once we get rid of that, then I think we can move forward and actually deal with the real issues.
This documentary, 2.5 years from the first thought to, and you're still working on it now, it's going to be one heck of a thing for people to sit down and watch, I'm sure.
It's big. I mean, that's the through line, and I didn't intend it to take this long either, but there you go. Look, the first feature doc I worked on for 4 years, and that's the reality of working as an independently funded filmmaker. So I knew I was in it for the long haul. I just didn't quite plan for it to be this long, but I think it's really important. Like, I could have made a shorter story. I could have followed just Annette and Stuart's story in The Winter Solstice, which is an incredible story. But the conversations we need to have around mental health and suicide are bigger than one story, and I don't want the conversations to be relegated to one story. I want this to be a document that when someone watches it, they go, oh, wow, it's not just a sad thing that they lost their daughter or a sad thing that she's lost her husband. This is a problem across the globe. So, and part of the story actually is in London with some people who are working over there as well. Yeah.
Time for a little bit of fun, I think.
Sorry.
We spoke earlier on in this interview about people you admire, and you sort of had a fairly collective response there.
Yeah.
A question I like to ask people is if you could have anyone over for dinner, 4 or 5 people, or, you put the limitations on it, and they're alive or dead, whoever, who would you like to have sitting there with you to pick the brain of, or to bring humour to your day, or what would it be?
Well, okay, so it's probably not going to feel fun for you, but this would be the most amazing thing for me. If I could have my husband who died at the table with his daughter that he never met, and with his mum, that for me, those 3 people would be the penultimate dinner for me. Yeah. Yeah,
definitely. Anyone famous? Would you have anyone famous there?
Oh, yeah, so many people I admire. There's a Indian filmmaker who I really admire called Deepa Mehta. She's not really well known. She's made 3 films. She's made Earth, Air, Water, and they all look at the partitioning of India and Pakistan. And they are so beautiful. Every image is just so delicious. I'd love to sit with her and learn from her. David Attenborough, because I would just love to actually marry him. I think he's incredible. And I love his gentleness, and I love how he's managed to traverse such, I think for him has been such a heartbreaking journey over the decades, watching the environment depleted, how he's done that with so much grace and wisdom and humanness. I definitely would love to have him there.
And interestingly, when he joined Instagram, got a heap of followers, made a statement, then he left Instagram again, I think. Yeah. Is that what happened with David?
Yes,
I think. He got in, had the impact and moved on.
Yeah, he's incredible.
So you're at that dinner table, sweet or savoury? Which would you go for?
Oh, savoury, yeah. I'm really not into sugar at all.
Good. And I know we touched on it earlier, what do you do with your spare time? But weekends, what are they for?
Well, at the moment, they're for filming Fruit Fly Circus endlessly. So I do a lot of stuff on the weekend. So I film theatre as well. So often on a weekend I'll be doing a bit of filming. But other than that, it can be anything. I mean, I really just love actually just catching up with friends as well. We're really lucky in this community that we can connect easily. And yeah, for me, camping. I really do love it. I think because when I'm at home, I don't really stop. So to go camping means I can stop.
And that's probably that home office trait coming back in when you've got it attached to your home, when you know that's where your studio is. You go, I'll go and do a bit more of that and I'll come back and distractions fly.
Yeah.
Helen Newman, I really do appreciate you taking some time out of your day to sit here and go through the journey process, and really do wish you all the best as you wrap up that documentary. And please stay in touch with us and let us know as that gets wrapped up. And as I know we'll see and hear about it everywhere. You're very well respected in our community. But yeah, really appreciate you taking time for the journey.
Great, thank you.